although people are getting to the idea that consciousness and spirit are really important, they're not properly applying that in terms of the history of what's going on here. And I was having this conversation with somebody recently, and a major part of my work is the mystical principles, the metaphysical principles, if you don't like the word mysticism, from the ancient world, from the ancient earth world, and how they are still very central to modern life, but are now largely hidden. So that those mystical principles of magic and manifestation and creation and destruction, they're not part of the mainstream dialogue anymore. They're entirely separated out from consensus reality. So let me get a bit esoteric here with you for a moment, if you would indulge me, Brooks.
I love esotericism. Go ahead.
Okay. Let's talk about the ritual magic element of what's been going on at the Boston Marathon for a moment, because I see some value in considering the question of psychological operations, psy-ops, from a metaphysical angle, not just the practicalities and the tactical things, as well as the psychological effects we talked about earlier, propagated through the media and so on. There is also a further, more mystical law being exercised with the Boston Marathon, right? One that requires blood to be spilled, okay?
Right.
And in other words, it is a sacrifice, a ritual sacrifice. And sacrifice is something that was taken and co-opted from the ancients, and it was distorted and changed into something else. They didn't approach it how we have these images of these savages in beads with blades cutting virgins' throats. It wasn't like that at all. The whole thing was modified to serve the negative emanations of this world, and now its sacrifice is indeed very much a dark piece of magic. So let's take an example, right? And to approach this in the right manner, I just need to set the scene here for a second. So let me propose a scenario for you to think about, okay? So let's imagine for a moment that we're going to conduct a piece of serious reality engineering, right? We're going to intervene in the usual regulated flow of consensus reality, and we are going to make something very particular happen in accordance with our will. We are going to create a specific kind of situation and manifest it into the construct, right? And we're going to achieve this by creating an analog, a template, right? A piece of ritual theatre that will simulate the real thing that we actually want to manifest. And let us say that in our magical operation to do this, there are three elements, right? Three buildings, in fact. So picture this. Building A, right, is a building in which a simulation of a live shooting is taking place, right? A live shooter training drill simulating the sort of calamity of a rogue shooter killing innocent people, with all the planning and drama and guns and screaming kids and hiding and grief that entails. So that's building A training exercise. Building B is a secret building, let's say, in which an experienced magical practitioner is harnessing certain powers, certain forms of essentially electromagnetic radiation that science is a bit sketchy on at the moment, and he is harnessing these potent fourth density forces based on the situation, the simulation that is occurring in Building A. He is harvesting and focusing the sort of fountain of human consciousness, the energies of violence and fear, and the huge emotional outpouring. He's taking those real forces and transferring them into the outside world, outside of the simulation and into the real. So finally, we have Building C, in which the events of Building A begin to transpire in reality. People kill people for real. And it could be that Building C is totally unconnected with Building A. The real one is unconnected with the simulation. They may have nothing to do with each other at all. Or it could be that Building C is pre-selected. Both are possible. So do you see the dynamic there? Do you see the magical principle there? Do you get the magical orchestration from within Building B? That's where the sorcery takes place. That's what makes the connection. That changes the reality. So there's this kind of micro-theatre simulation being played out in Building A, and they're taking that pattern, charging it with real emotions, and manifesting it, apparently, spontaneously and randomly, into another location nearby. No strings, no evidential trail, no logic to it, and it's beyond the mind of the mainstream man. And this is a very old, traditional magical operation, and I see that there's a connection there with Boston.
Sure. But it's a broad analog, because in Building A you have this spiritual creation where you have at least imagined or at least pictured some relationship or some concepts. And then in Building B, you physically create that by putting energy behind it and manifesting it, investing in it, putting the pieces in place so the possibility becomes much more imminent. And in Building C, you actually have the occurrence take place. But, what we need to do as a society, as individuals, is to realize that we have abdicated our responsibility in Building B to someone else.
Well, that's right. And that, for me, that 4D sorcery aspect of this, as I say, has equal importance to the 3D sort of tactical aspect. And, we can't fully comprehend it. Most people think it's fantasy, that sort of thing. But if you only play private investigator and conspiracy researcher, as the media would have it, you will come to a dead end. You will ultimately draw a blank. And equally, if you just think about the philosophy of it, you'll also draw a blank.
Sure.
What we have to do is both. We have to educate ourselves to be philosophers and scientists and mystics and tacticians if we have to have any real sort of penetrating perceptions here. And if you want, just by the way, the satisfaction, this is quite important in a way, if you want the satisfaction of having to think that there's some sort of karmic payback for the negative magic and the negative sorcerers involved in this, let me tell you, the universe never allows anyone to get away sort of scot-free from such things. It might appear that they do. They might walk away laughing and rubbing their hands and, going undetected by human authorities. But on another level, there is an indebtedness that will not go away until it is paid in full with interest. So they know that. And there are sometimes even, and this is very odd, but attempts to take another human soul and try and offload the karma onto that soul. And this, in certain areas, is called the law of restorative harmonics, and they put it onto them. But such things, whilst they appear to have an immediate effect, they don't really. It just makes matters worse. So negative magical rituals cannot be sprayed liberally around. It has to be very specific, very concentrated, and very carefully calculated. You can't really, just do it willy-nilly. And you cannot also, and this comes back to what you just said, Brooks, you can't do it to someone without their free will. So it's much easier to get away with stuff by garnering unconscious support for this collective destruction. So ask people if it's okay to kill each other legally, as we have agreed to do so in Britain and Europe and America, and then go ahead and do it. So ask people, is it okay to throw away the constitutions and the principles and our abiding guidelines of natural human law, and instead just accept a bunch of crooks running the show? Is that okay? And we said, yes, it is okay.
Yeah, we did. We allowed the federal government to conscribe our state militias, stick an extra patch on their shoulder, put them in an airplane, send them to a foreign country, and tell them to kill, instead of helping Americans during times of tornadoes and floods and hurricanes and fires and earthquakes, which is what the National Guard has traditionally done for 375 years. And the individuals that signed up for the Weekend Warrior program, 2 weekends a month and 2 weeks in the summertime, ended up serving full-time as warriors, not what they signed up to be, and instead of bullets or tanks or gas or exposure getting them, suicide got them.
Yeah, that's very true, and that was a very startling statistic that has been brought out in recent times, isn't it? That more people are offing themselves, if I can put it bluntly like that, than are being killed in actual live theatre conflict. I just wanted to cover one more thing briefly related to the Boston Marathon event. I made a little note on a post-it note here, and I forgot to mention it. So it's a bit disjointed, this, from the original part of the conversation, but back to the sort of esoteric angle of that, we talked about some of the sorcery of using analogues and creating a pattern and then making that go out into the real world. Well, another thing that's special about that particular date, April the 15th, is that it's unusual in if you look at sort of Golden Dawn and Rosicrucian inspired, Egyptian numerological correspondences. 105 is a very important number, and April the 15th is the 105th day of the year. So when a magical exercise is conducted, they don't do it just on any day. They choose the day very carefully. And 105, in their magical traditions, to the best of my knowledge, is associated with subversion, ruin, and change, right? Now, as I said before, you can't fully comprehend what's happening here until you know both situations in this play. So we have to just consider this information. Whether you think it's relevant or not is something to decide later, but we have to consider it. April the 15th is also the festival of Ba'ast, or Ubast, the Egyptian cat goddess. And this deity has been consistently worshipped since around 3000 BC, 5,000 years ago. And the cult of Ba'ast was centered in a place in the Delta region along the Nile. You might have even been near it. A place called Bubastis. Sounds a bit like Boston to me. And there were wonderful stone statues of this goddess, the Eye of Ra, the Lady of the Flame as she was known. Originally she was lion-headed and solar, and then later became depicted as cat-headed and lunar, of the moon. And the stone that we have today, alabaster, is named after this deity. But she was considered as, and this is the key bit, the defender of the pharaoh. That is, the defender of the empire. And so the festival of Ba'ast is to defend the empire. And every year, in times gone by, on festival day, thousands of people would gather. There would be music, song, dance, and sacrifice. And Ba'ast was central to this, and blood would need to be spilled to be given to this goddess. And so anyone who has done their esoteric homework, we all know that Egypt is incredibly important to understanding the hidden political maneuverings here. It's not just some old-fashioned weird stuff. It's absolutely vital that you understand Egypt and the last few thousand years of it. And in this sense, it is not such a stretch to say that the blood spilled at the Boston Marathon was a sacrifice to Ba'ast in this magical sense. I'll throw this one in as a little, this is more of an esoteric curiosity, quite frankly. It was also the day of the Boston Marathon that 101 years ago the Titanic sank. So there's a little point of interest. And so, depending on how seriously you look at this, you have to take all factors into account. And as one of my heroes, Sherlock Holmes, although he is fictional, but based on a real guy, although Holmes was meticulous about details, he said, when you're investigating the essence of a thing, you have to take into account all the details that seem utterly trivial, all of them. And some of them you may indeed drop and say, actually, that's not relevant, let's get rid of it. But put all of them in at first, put all of them into that crucible. And then when you bring your flame to it, your fire of thought, your gift of divine reason, your lucidity, then the things that are untrue will burn away and will disappear. And what's left will be the truth. So we should never be afraid to throw in, seemingly unconnected things or things that are distant. So knowing a lot about pagan philosophy and pagan spirituality from Britain, April the 15th is also the beginning of the Willow Moon which is a celebration of the willow tree, which is a very important magical plant, and it is a tree that its power is associated with enchantment. And the media, the corporate media, if they aren't doing an enchantment job on the minds of the people, then I don't know who is.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I have a listener out in Arizona that just mentioned this is the first public sacrifice to have 21st century media coverage.
Right. So I think it's viable, and I think it's appropriate that sometimes we consider this as enchantment, as not in the kind of glorious, lovely, radiant way, but as a negative spell, enchanting somebody against their will to do something that is in dishonor. And I think it's absolutely appropriate to see the sorcery behind that. And if anybody doubts it, go back in the history books, go to Greece, go to Rome, and look for patterns that are just like this, where not only were there events orchestrated, which is where most people stop, right? The government orchestrated it, that's the end for us. But the question in everybody's minds is why? Why do they do these things? Why do they do these things? And my answer to that, the simple answer, which you then have to go away and unravel in your own time, is because low resonance human consciousness is a very good resource for beings trapped in negative dimensions.
Right, it builds armies quickly.
Very important.
Yeah, it builds armies very quickly, and that's...
It does, and so the theatre, although we have to take account of it and we have to understand it, the real lives, real heroes on the streets in Boston, real people dead now, they're real families with real emotions and real lives. There is nevertheless an orchestration of that energy at a level that many people do not take into account. And so if you do have a mystical awareness or mystical training or mystical initiation, which I do have all those things, then it becomes part of my self-appointed obligation, my duty, to say, well, let me tell you something else about what might be happening here. And with that, you can then go away and do some of your own studies. You can go and have a look at that yourself. And you can, not just with Google, but also with your own mind and your own intuition, your own connection to the universe, your own ability to gather with other people.